Hello there and good morning. It is 10 a.m. This is Sky News Today, your headlines. Labour secures thumping double by-election victories, overturning large Conservative majorities to take Wellingborough and Kingswood.
The people of Wellingborough have spoken for Britain. This is a stunning victory for the Labour Party and must send a message from Northamptonshire to Downing Street.
And that with Rishi's recession, we're left again paying more and getting less.
The suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann appears in court in Germany over allegations of rape and sexual abuse. A boost for the high street as retail sales rise to their highest levels since spring of 2021. And marriage equality supporters celebrate in Greece after it becomes the first Orthodox country to legalise same-sex unions. Hello and good morning. Plenty to get to this morning on Sky News Today. Now, Labour is celebrating double by-election victories after taking Kingswood and Wellingborough from the Conservatives. Keir Starmer has said the results are a sign the public want change ahead of the coming general election. Let us take you through the results in some more detail. Now, in Wellingborough, Jen Kitchen overturned a majority of more than 18,000 to take the seats from the Tories. She secured a comfortable majority of 6,436, although turnout was low at 38%. Well, the swing from the Tories to Labour was 28.5%. That's the highest, second highest of any post-war by-election. While in Kingswood, Damien Egan overturned a majority of more than 11,000 to win. He won by 2,500 votes. Turnout was even lower at just over 37%. Now, the swing in Kingswood was 16.4%. And speaking in the last hour, Sir Keir Starmer has said there is still plenty of work to do if the Labour Party are to replicate these results in a general election.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party. And last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go. And as every football fan knows, you don't win the league by a good result in February. So we've got to fight. Like we're 5 points behind in the polls, got to earn every vote as we go forward.
You may not be the whole way there, but does this make you confident, more confident, that you'll be the Prime Minister after the next election?
What I take from these by-elections is that repeatedly now, voters are being clear with the government that they want change. We've seen not just these two by-elections, but previous by-elections, the same basic message coming from the electorate. We're fed up, nothing's working, we want change. After 14 years, the Tories can't provide that change because they failed. They look therefore to the Labour Party. They see a changed Labour Party that has got an answer to their issues, the cost of living crisis, the NHS, the broken public services, and they're prepared to put their vote behind the Labour Party. So that vindicates the hard work we've done in the last 4 years to change the Labour Party, now unrecognisable from the party that lost in 2019. But we've got to fight for every vote. We've got to make sure that we understand there's more work to be done, a long, long way to go.
Indeed. Now, the Prime Minister says that the low turnout shows a lack of enthusiasm for Labour.
Well, midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
Are you more concerned about Reform UK or about Labour?
A vote for anyone who isn't the Conservative candidate, whether that's Reform or anyone else, is just a vote to put Keir Starmer in power. That's the actual choice at the general election between me and him, between the Conservatives and Labour. Now, I believe our plan is working. At the start of this year, we're heading in the right direction. Taxes are coming down, inflation is falling, and if we stick with that plan, we can deliver everyone a brighter future, give them the peace of mind that is there for them and their families. They can have a renewed sense of pride in our country. And the alternative, as we've seen over the past week, is a Labour Party who don't have a plan, can't tell you what they would do differently, and that means no change.
That's the Prime Minister speaking earlier. Let's bring in our Chief Political Correspondent, John Craig, now with the story of the night.
I do hereby declare that Genevieve Victoria Kitchen, also known as Jen Kitchen, of the Labour Party, is duly elected.
Victory for Labour in Wellingborough, where a 4 a.m. declaration completed a night of double celebration for Sir Keir Starmer and his party.
I do hereby declare that the Union is duly elected.
Earlier, Labour triumphed in Kingswood in another disastrous result for the Conservatives. The by-election victories came after a tough week for Labour.
In Kingswood, as across the country, 14 years of Conservative government have sucked the hope out of our country.
The people of Wellingborough have spoken for Britain. This is a stunning victory for the Labour Party and must send a message from Northamptonshire to Downing Street.
So 2 emphatic by-election victories for Labour, winning here by 6,500 votes and 2,500 in Kingswood. The Tory vote has collapsed in both constituencies, and there have been strong performances by Reform UK.
The Conservative Party is the problem, and they need to go. Reform UK is a genuine, democratic alternative to the Labour and Conservative Party. We're not going to do any deals with any party.
But one senior Conservative put a brave face on the strong showing by Reform UK.
It's a good result for Reform, but it's also a good result for what I would call a family of Conservatives. What we must do is reunite the broad Tory family.
The results mean the Conservatives have now lost more by-elections than John Major in the 1992 to 97 Parliament. But while Labour celebrate, for the Conservatives the recriminations will begin, with the pressure on Rishi Sunak intensifying. John Craig, Sky News, Wellingborough.
Let's go to Wellingborough now and bring in our political correspondent, Rob Powell, for more on this. Good morning to you, Rob. So, look, you're going to see much celebration from the Labour Party today. What had the main deciding factor, do you think, for this huge swing?
I think the big swing can be explained in part by individual circumstances around this constituency, but I think because it is pretty similar to what we have seen in other by-elections recently in Selby and Ainsty, in places like Tamworth, actually I think it's more broadly a general dissatisfaction with how things are working at the moment. You've heard from the Conservatives them saying that things like cost of living came up on the doorstep. I think as well, though, after so many years of kind of turmoil and chaos, if you like, if we're being more critical in the Conservative government, actually I think this is a backlash against that, and it's a backlash sort of that's been expressed in two ways. One is through that absolutely giant swing to Labour. I think the other is through that increase in the vote for the Reform Party, who are basically challenging the Conservatives on the other political side. They're a right-wing party. They have a big message and a big focus on things like immigration and low taxation. And I think the worry for the Conservatives is that they will be potentially losing votes at a general election to the left, to parties like Labour and the Lib Dems, and then maybe slipping and bleeding a few votes on the other side to Reform as well. And that is a really, really dangerous.
Just one look at you, and I know it's gonna be.
Ben Habib, who you saw in that report when I was speaking to him a few moments ago, is that it is basically correct that in the current electoral system that we have, a vote for reform does make it more likely that Labour and Keir Starmer do get in. Now, I think the usual caveats apply here around by-elections, that people vote differently in by-elections to general elections, and I think what the spin that the Conservatives are trying to put on it this morning is basically, if you look at the overall number of votes, so not a percentage, but the sort of practical number of people that put their ticks in each box, the Labour vote stayed about the same compared to 2019, whereas the Conservative vote collapsed. Now, clearly, part of the reason for that is because you had a much lower turnout, and what the Tories are trying to say is that this just shows 2019 Labour voters coming out and Conservative voters staying at home. Now, that's a generous interpretation of the situation, I think. Labour say there are switchers, there are people that voted Conservative in 2019 that are now voting Labour. It's sort of hard to really get an accurate read on what's going on kind of below the waterline a little bit. I think you'll probably find there's a little bit of all of that happening. In terms of individual circumstances relating to the seat, clearly the former Conservative MP here, Peter Bone, was booted out of office through a recall petition after accusations surrounding acting inappropriately in a sexual way and bullying. It was his partner that was the Conservative candidate here, so I think that probably had some sort of sway in what's going on here. But look, the main takeaway shouldn't detract from the main takeaway of this, that this is a thumping, huge defeat for the Conservatives. They've had many of these bleak Friday post-by-election mornings in the last couple of years. This is the bleakest at this Parliament. It is almost the worst result in terms of Labour to Tory swing that we have ever seen. And I think this close to a general election, that is closing in on catastrophic for the party. For Rishi Sunak personally, look, it will probably lead to a bit of agitation and people on the backbenches that are more critical of his leadership to start to try and disrupt him a little bit. Will it change and bring in a more broader consensus that it's time for him to go? I really do doubt that, because I just think a lot of Tory MPs think that actually changing leader again now might land them in an even worse position.
Well, for now in Wellingborough, thank you for that. Let's go to Kingswood, where our correspondent Dan Whitehead is standing by. Dan, what's the story of the night from there? And tell us about this seat, 'cause it's not going to exist at the next election, is it?
No, the new Labour MP here in Kingswood, the first Labour MP in 14 years, will only be an MP for Kingswood for a matter of months, because the constituency seat here is being abolished under the boundary reforms at the next general election. An interesting point on that locally and for the Tories is that the seats of Kingswood are being distributed to a number of other constituencies, the vast majority of which, nearly half, going to North East Somerset and Hanham. Whose seat is that? Well, that's Jacob Rees-Moggs. So he's going to have to win over a load of brand new Labour voters, so that will be interesting in the election. I think the result here, look, it's not as a significant victory as in Wellingborough, but still a 16.5% swing to Labour. They secured a 2,500 seat majority, and Damien Egan, speaking to him in the last hour, says that the word on the high street when he was campaigning yesterday are just really key general election issues. The NHS, cost of living, policing, and Labour really will be hoping that the result here in Kingswood, as well as in Wellingborough, will be echoed across the country in the forthcoming general election. The victory here was not really a constituency issue. The by-election here was not led to because of a constituency issue of scandal or anything. So speaking to people on the high street here, they say it's simply time for change. Other interesting things to note are similar to in Wellingborough is how Reform UK, the former Brexit party, performed. They secured 10% of the vote here. They came third, beating the Lib Dems, who won't even get their deposit back. So I think the Conservatives will be looking at the distribution of where those votes went from the Conservatives, not only to Labour but to the third place in Reform UK, and how that will convert to a general election. Plenty of analysis for the Tories to do here, but certainly a celebration in Kingswood for the Labour Party this morning. It's still a significant victory.
OK, Dan, for now, thanks for that. Of course, we'll have more coverage of those by-election victories throughout the day here on Sky News. Now, retail sales figures have bounced back in January after registering a record fall in December. Sales volume rose 3.4%, the biggest monthly rise since April 2021. The increase follows December's record fall of 3.3%. I'm pleased to say we've got our business presenter Ian King for more on this. Ian, it's great to have you with us this morning, and good morning to you. What do these retail sales figures tell us, of course, coming off the back of the fact that we found out we're in a technical recession yesterday?
Yeah, to take that point head on, Kamali, I mean, there's a lot of scepticism that the UK was actually in the recession at the end of last year. The numbers are obviously prone to revision, and certainly the fact that you had a 0.1% contraction in the third quarter, well, that's very, very easily revised away. But I think what these figures point to is the fact that the economy itself has rebounded pretty strongly in the first quarter of this year. Now, one can't read too much into one set of monthly numbers, and particularly with the retail sales figures, because they are quite often prone.
Look, I know, I'm sorry, but we just can't get her down.
I just thought you might like this.
Oh, that's so nice.
Tesco finest shiitake mushrooms, hand-picked for a rich flavour. Food Love Stories, brought to you by Tesco.
Changing consumer spending patterns in the tail end of last year, the number for November was pretty strong, and it pointed to the fact that a lot of people were doing their Christmas shopping early, and particularly around that Black Friday promotional period, and accordingly you did see a bit of a drop off in December. The number was actually revised down from 3.2 to 3.3% actually this morning. So it does suggest that really the impact of these long interest rate rises that we had from the end of 2021 until August last year, some 14 interest rate rises from the Bank of England. The impact of that among some consumers is starting to weigh off. It's interesting to note, Kamali, that in fact every single category bar clothing saw an increase in January. The supermarkets were the key beneficiaries, food sales recovering quite strongly, and there is some evidence to point to the January sales period at the beginning of the month having had an impact as well. Now, what does it mean for where we go from here? Well, bear in mind that it certainly looks as though interest rates have peaked. Obviously, you've got a number of households who are still rolling off fixed rate mortgages deals and probably moving on to more expensive mortgage rate deals. So some elements of the economy, some consumers will remain under financial pressure. But bear in mind also the fact that inflation appears to have peaked as well. In fact, the number that we got earlier this week, 4%, was lower than expected. It's now expected that the Bank of England target of 2% is going to be hit fairly shortly. So one would expect consumer spending to be reasonably positive from here.
Okay, Ian, for now in the city, do appreciate that. Thanks for that, Ian King there. All right, let me bring you some news that's come in to us. It's actually come from the X account of the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and it concerns aid that's been delivered by the UK and Qatar to the Gaza city of Rafah. You can see the UK and Qatar joint aid consignment has arrived in Rafah. They say that family-sized tents distributed by UNICEF are providing vital shelter for those in need. Then Israel must take steps to significantly increase the flow of aid into Gaza. You will remember that just this week, the Israeli Prime Minister announced plans for a operation in Rafah and had asked for his military planners to draw up ideas to evacuate the people of Rafah. Some 1.3 million Palestinians displaced from other parts of Gaza are now situated in the area in and around Rafah. The UN agencies and other nations have said that any military operation in that area would be catastrophic. And now, as we can see, the Foreign Office and Qatar have provided aid and shelters. More on that story, of course, throughout the day. Now, the main suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann has appeared in court in Germany on unrelated charges of rape and sexual abuse. The man, known only as Christian B because of privacy law, is accused of a number of offences in Portugal between 2000 and 2017. His lawyer made objections about one of the two judges, and the case has now been adjourned. Let's bring in our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, who's at the court in Braunschweig in Germany. Martin, great to have you with us. So just tell us what's happened this morning now. Court got underway first thing, as I understand it. We saw some pictures of the man known as Christian B, but it's now adjourned. How come?
Nothing much happened. We were expecting perhaps half a day or at least a few hours of the court at the start of this trial, but it didn't get off the ground. It just wasn't what anybody was expecting. So Christian B was brought into court. There was a delay anyway because there were so many members of the media here, 50 or 60, trying to cram into court. He came into court, he was handcuffed, he was wearing a light blue jacket, he looked perhaps a little tense but no obvious emotion, and as he sat down beside his lawyer, there were some general introductions, and then his lawyer, Friedrich Fulcher, stood up and he told the three judges that he was objecting to the presence of one of them. There's a principal judge and two lay judges. That's how the system works here. Fulcher, the defence lawyer, said that he objected to the presence of one of those lay lawyers because of tweets that she had posted recently about the ex-president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro. And those tweets included, he said, the words, "kill the bastard" and "kill the devil." Now, his interpretation of those tweets, he said, was that this lay judge wasn't somebody who was prepared to respect human rights or to adhere to the rule of law. On that basis, he said, she should not be taking part in the trial of his client, Christian B. The upshot was that the court was adjourned for half an hour or so. Everybody filed back in. Christian B came back in handcuffs, and the principal judge announced that this was going to be adjourned for a week. And between now and then, the court will decide whether that lay judge can be kept on the panel of three, or whether she will have to be replaced. Christian B said nothing in those two very brief appearances, and he's just gone off back to the prison. He's being kept here in Germany, a couple of hours drive from this city. But everybody will be back here in a week's time to see if it's the same judges or whether there's a replacement.
Okay, Martin, for now, thank you for that. And a note to the language that was used there that was heard in court. Now, world leaders are gathering in Munich for the annual security conference. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, is there for us and joins us now live. Deborah, it's great to have you with us this morning. Now, look, I always look forward to this Munich security conference. I know that it feels like sometimes a talking shop, but the past couple of years it's been really quite important, hasn't it? What are we expecting from this one?
Yes, well, you'll remember it was about a week before Russia's full-scale invasion 2 years ago that this conference was held, and actually President Zelensky himself was here, and countries at that moment were really warning Russia, warning Vladimir Putin not to take that step, not to go across the Rubicon and invade Ukraine with this large-scale invasion. That then happened, fundamentally changing the European security landscape, galvanising this place. This conference has been going on for years, but it's become a really huge event. You can probably see some of the security situation and police behind me. It's a very locked down area here in the centre of Munich. People, like leaders, came last year, and it was all about Germany very much galvanising its own defences, pledging to spend much more money on defence, other NATO allies doing the same. This year, however, it really is pressure time. The war in Ukraine is still going on. Russian forces are still pushing forward. Ukraine is running out of ammunition. There's massive amounts of pressure on Western allies to ramp up the production of ammunition. That's the key issue that the UK is focusing on. And then all eyes are on the United States. Kamala Harris, the Vice President, will be here as well today. Whether or not the US Congress is going to pass this significant package of military aid that is fundamental for the Ukrainian armed forces. I spoke this morning to our Defence Secretary, and he had this message for the United States.
In the case of America, it's actually directly in their benefit, no matter which party they are, Republican or Democrat, because they're all concerned about how autocrats all over the world look at what's happening, what Putin's done, and then maybe drawing conclusions, well, if you can get away with it just by boring the West into submission, essentially just carry on until the West looks elsewhere, then of course there'll be other places in the world where other regimes would say, well, we'll take advantage of that. So it's directly in America's to America's advantage as well to ensure that Ukraine wins this war.
Well, it really does remain to be seen whether American Congress people are going to be listening to British warnings, but that's very much a message being sent from here. And then there's also huge concern about the potential, if Ukraine isn't able to withstand Russia's invasion, whether Vladimir Putin then looks beyond Ukraine's borders towards NATO territory, and that's something that really is on people's minds too. And I also asked the Defence Secretary about that. He said it's important not to scare people. He wasn't very supportive of the head of the British Army's calls for the need for citizen armies to train citizens to be ready for war, saying that for now that's not on the agenda and it's all about better maintaining and supporting the professional military. And one last thing, I've been reporting this morning about how a number of military officers could quit the armed forces because they're incredibly unhappy with a new offer that's being given to the military for their accommodation, saying that it will actually result in officers seeing their housing that they are given or that they're entitled to shrinking in size, and saying that they will vote with their boots if that happens. I asked the Defence Secretary about that too. He said that this new model is all about helping to retain people in the military, and he will be looking at all the details.
OK, Deborah Fernell in Munich, thank you for that. All right, you're watching Sky News Today, and still to come, it's an historic day in Greece as crowds celebrate the passing of a same-sex marriage bill.
I mean, it's almost hard to imagine that this would be the case. You know, MBS is this world powerful leader that's involved in so many things, and yet he's spending so much of his time. I think we wrote in the article that he spent as much as 7 weeks with him last year, and they have a real connection. You know, so it's one of those kind of hard to believe things that exist in the world.
Yeah, I guess, you know, it's not totally unlikely. We have seen these sorts of friendships take place before. And I guess in many ways, it's sort of the chance for a certain state to almost like revamp their brand.
Well, I think, you know, Saudi Arabia is really investing a huge amount of money into becoming an entertainment destination. So if you film a movie in Saudi Arabia, the rebates that are offered to filmmakers are some of the best in the world. And there's a huge influx of Hollywood producers, actors. And so it's not surprising in that sense, because obviously this, you know, during a time when there's entertainment downturn, Saudi Arabia is investing in film and willing to invest in Johnny Depp's films as well.
Welcome back. Now, supporters of marriage equality have celebrated in Greece, which has become the first Orthodox majority country to legalise same-sex unions. People have been out on the streets of the capital, Athens, to celebrate that decision. Let's bring in our reporter, Amelia Harper, for more on this. So, Amelia, just tell us why this is quite such the momentous occasion for Greece and the Orthodox world.
Well, this is something that looking at other countries in the European Union, based on the fact that they already have legalised, many of them, same-sex marriage. It's something you might have thought was already the case, but it isn't. Same-sex marriage now has been legalised in Greece, and this took place in a vote in the Greek parliament. It passed 176 votes to 76. And reacting to this, the Greek Prime Minister said it was a momentous day for the country, and he said it would boldly abolish a serious inequality, and it also means that same-sex couples will be allowed as well to adopt children. This is something, though, that's been very divisive in the country. It's been particularly opposed by the Greek Orthodox Church. You can see their protest pictures in Athens. We've also heard from the head of the Orthodox Church, Archbishop Leronymus. He said the measure would corrupt the homeland's social cohesion, so they're not happy about this. But how does it compare to other European countries? Well, 15 out of 27 European Union countries have already legalised same-sex marriage. It's legal in 35 countries worldwide. So Greece comparatively lagging behind on this, but really it's a win for LGBTQ plus campaign groups, but for the Orthodox Church in Greece, not so much for them.
Okay, Amelia, for now, I do appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, let's take a look at the weather forecast for the next couple of days.
Warm memories.
Well, the mild and settled theme will watching Sky News Today, and coming up we're going to continue our coverage of those by-election victories for the Labour Party. I'm going to be speaking to the former Minister, Lord Vasey, as the Conservatives reflect on those defeats. Hello there and welcome back. Let's return to our top story, and the Conservatives suffered a double defeat overnight in two by-elections with swings to the Labour Party. In Wellingborough, Jen Kitchen overturned a majority of more than 18,000 to take the seat from the Tories. She got a comfortable majority of 6,436. Turnout was low though, at about 38%. Well, the Conservative vote crashed almost 38%. It's the second highest swing to Labour in any post-war by-election. While in Kingswood, Damien Egan overturned a majority of more than 11,000 to win. He got a slimmer majority than in Wellingborough, 2,501, and turnout was even lower at just over 37%. Now in Kingswood, Labour boosted their vote share by 11.5%, a swing from the Tories of 16.4%. Well, in the last hour or so, Sir Keir Starmer has said that there is plenty still for the Labour Party to do to try and replicate these results at a general election.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party. And last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go. And as every football fan knows, you don't win the league by a good result in February. So we've got to fight, like we're 5 points behind in the polls, got to earn every vote as we go forward.
You may not be the whole way there, but does this make you confident, more confident, that you'll be the Prime Minister after the next election?
What I take from these by-elections is that repeatedly now voters are being clear with the government that they want change. We've seen not just these two by-elections but previous by-elections, the same basic message coming from the electorate. We're fed up, nothing's working, we want change. After 14 years, the Tories can't provide that change because they failed. They look therefore to the Labour Party. They see a changed Labour Party that has got an answer to their issues, the cost of living crisis, the NHS, the broken public services, and they're prepared to put their vote behind the Labour Party. So that vindicates the hard work we've done in the last 4 years to change the Labour Party, now unrecognisable from the party that lost in 2019. But we've got to fight for every vote. We've got to make sure that we understand there's more work to be done, a long, long way to go.
Well, the Prime Minister has said that the low turnout shows a lack of enthusiasm for the Labour Party.
Well, midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan, and if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change, and when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
Are you more concerned about Reform UK or about Labour?
A vote for anyone who isn't the Conservative candidate, whether that's Reform or anyone else, is just a vote to put Keir Starmer in power. That's the actual choice at the general election between me and him, between the Conservatives and Labour. Now, I believe our plan is working. At the start of this year, we're heading in the right direction. Taxes are coming down, inflation is falling, and if we stick with that plan, we can deliver everyone a brighter future, give them the peace of mind that that is there for them and their families. They can have a renewed sense of pride in our country. And the alternative, as we've seen over the past week, is a Labour Party who don't have a plan, can't tell you what they would do differently, and that means no change.
Let's speak now to Lord Ed Vaizey, the Conservative peer and, of course, former Minister. Lord Vaizey, it's great to have you with us this morning, and I'm surprised you actually came in after those results overnight. It's not been a good night.
It's not been a good night for the Tories, but in some ways, I'm more of an observer. I think people obviously expected the Tories to lose these two by-elections, and all the usual by-election mantras will come out that governing parties lose by-elections and the only ballot that counts is the final ballot at the general election. But obviously no one is going to say that this is a good result. All you can say is a few things. First of all, that the polls will narrow as the election gets closer. And secondly, that, the Tories should be thinking there is still something to play for whether it's losing the match by fewer goals or even getting a draw. And that is about uniting. The Tory party has to get behind Rishi Sunak and just face forward for the general election.
And get behind the leader, because of course there have been rumblings about his position since this has happened, and with Reform doing quite so well, calls as well for the party to maybe tack even further to the right. Would you advise against that?
I would personally advise against that. And you're right, there are loads of statistics that come out of this by-election, these two by-elections, which are not great for the Tories. And people will be saying, the second largest swing since the Second World War, this is terrible, it's the Tory wipeout. The only thing that will produce a Tory wipeout is more division. If people take from these by-elections that the best thing to do now is to put in a letter saying that Rishi Sunak has to stand down as Prime Minister, that is exactly the wrong result. If they take from this by-election, and obviously Reform did well, they polled in the by-elections the same as they're polling in the national polls. If they take from this by-election, we have to tack to the right, they will be outflanked on the centre ground by Labour and the Liberal Democrats. The Tory party should stick in the centre where most of the voters are. They should capitalise on Rishi Sunak's strengths, which is getting a job done, and they should unite, because nobody votes for divided parties.
But we've just gone into what's described as a technical recession. They're not going to get any credit for that. 14 years. Has it not just reached the end? My colleague Sir Trevor Phillips was saying this morning, sometimes the weather changes. The weather has just changed, hasn't it, on the party?
Well, the weather's been changing for a very long time. This is obviously, this result kind of confirms how bad the weather is. Nobody is necessarily expecting the Tory party to win the next election. That could be a strength. Just get the job done, business, work hard. I mean, the thing that drives me mad as well about the Tory party is these kind of siren calls for tax cuts. I mean, what people want, they don't want, what Margaret Thatcher did in the 1980s. And it took her 8 years to impose significant tax cuts once she had fixed the economy. What people want to see, and might be happening by the time of the November general election, is falling interest rates to make their mortgages more affordable, falling inflation to make their shopping bills more affordable, and that requires a sensible stewardship of the economy, not unaffordable tax cuts.
We've seen that on some of the papers this morning, calls for tax cuts as well. How damaging do you think that could be to the prospects if there were to be tax cuts? Because, of course, we heard yesterday the reporting was that when the tax cuts come, that's going to be offset by cuts in public spending.
Exactly. We do have a huge tax burden now. We're paying higher taxes than we have for 70 years, but a lot of that is the result of COVID, and frankly, it's a result of Brexit. There was a report this week showing that Brexit has wiped about 5% off the value of the economy. But I think the public would see through a kind of gimmicky tax cut that was handed out at the budget, which might please a few die-hard Tory backbenchers. What they want is a competent government that gives the impression it knows what it's doing, could well be know what it's doing. And in Jeremy Hunt, funnily enough, you've got a Chancellor who doesn't scare the horses. He's not particularly exciting or whatever, but he's competent and sensible like Rishi Sunak. I mean, the problem Rishi Sunak has is he's driven himself into a cul-de-sac with the stop the boats policy, a policy that's not a kind of do-or-die policy for Britain, but he's made it a kind of do-or-die policy for the Tory party.
You said a November election, so that's where you think is most likely, don't you?
I'm pretty certain. If I was sitting in Downing Street, I'd be saying, I hope the economy's turned a corner, announce the election at the October conference, go for a November election. Boris Johnson showed you can have a December election and still win well. There are lots of myths about when the best time to have an election is. I don't think, nor do I think that, it won't be a last-minute election like John Major did. It will still be an element of surprise. But it gives time for the economy to at least give the impression for people that things are going to get better.
You said in your first answer that you're more of an observer these days. We'll see how true that is. I mean, when you look back at your time, I was just going through your record here. You've been at this a spell now, haven't you? Do you look at some of the moments when the party's been in power for 14 years, you mentioned Brexit, and think we should have handled that in a much different way, and perhaps at this stage we could have held on to power?
I can't vote because I'm in the House of Lords, so I actually can't cast a vote at the next election. But I am tribal. I've been a Tory. I get told all the time by various Tories that I'm not a real Tory. I've been campaigning for the Tory party since I was kind of 16 years old. It's a terrible and sad fact to admit. But the thing that I feel so strongly about, and we did this again in 97, having lost the election, is we went on this kind of journey that people hadn't had enough Tory. And so we became more and more kind of right-wing. You need to stick in the centre ground. And I think that there is, Brexit has been a really divisive issue for the Tories.
Have you been honest enough about how bad Brexit has
been? No, the Brexiteers have not been honest enough about it. We could have had a soft Brexit. We could have had a Brexit that could have given us the semblance of the single market. Nobody seemed to give a monkeys about the people who run small businesses, who just export small things to Europe or import small things from Europe. Nobody seemed to care about any of that kind of stuff. It's all been far too ideological, which is not the Tory party's natural stance.
So where does the party go from here? You've talked about stability, and of course the Prime Minister will be hoping that things just turn around, but that kind of hope, as Trevor again said this morning, he seems to be carrying around sort of a bad luck cloud at times.
Yeah, I admire Rishi Sunak. I think he's a highly competent, highly intelligent man. He's not actually a brilliant politician, and he can get better, but he's got to, as I say, I think the Tory party his team should take a step back and say, what are Rishi Sunak's strengths? What can cut through that the public would know about Rishi Sunak? And it's that he is a competent and efficient administrator. Now, that doesn't it's not Boris Johnson. You're not going to cross the street necessarily to have a... You're not going to do that with Keir Starmer, are you? So Keir Starmer is no Tony Blair. Rishi Sunak is not Boris Johnson. But what Rishi Sunak has in great strength is this competence. This is really boring now, but things like sorting out the Windsor framework, that was a huge victory. The fact that Stormont is sitting again in Northern Ireland, that's a huge victory for which Rishi Sunak hasn't taken enough credit. You can sort stuff out, and Rishi Sunak he has set himself some goals, some of which he will make, some of which he won't, but he just needs to stay in the centre ground and say, I'm good at getting stuff done.
I mean, some would argue he's fixing the mistake.
I mean, I'm not saying, by the way, look, everyone knows what the polls are saying. Everyone knows what the likely result of the general election is. I'm just saying, you're here now, it's February. You've got an election in November. What can you do between now and then to get yourself back, at least back in the ring with a fighting chance rather than having been KO'd in March?
Not to get smashed by 4, maybe smashed by 2. Right, Lord Beatty, thank you very much for that. OK, you're watching Sky News Today and still to come. Almost 2 years on from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we're going to be speaking to the Red Cross on the impact of debt levels among Ukrainian refugees.
I mean, it's almost hard to imagine that this would be the case. MBS is this world powerful leader that's involved in so many things, and yet he's spending so much of his time. I think we wrote in the article that he spent as much as 7 weeks with him last year, and they have a real connection. So it's one of those kind of hard to believe things that exist in the world.
Yeah, I guess, it's not totally unlikely. We have seen these sorts of friendships take place before. And I guess in many ways, it's sort of the chance for a certain state to almost like revamp their brand.
Well, I think, Saudi Arabia is really investing a huge amount of money into becoming an entertainment destination. So if you film a movie in Saudi Arabia, the rebates that are offered to filmmakers are some of the best in the world. And there's a huge influx of Hollywood producers, actors. And so it's not surprising in that sense, because obviously this, during a time when there's entertainment downturn, Saudi Arabia is investing in film and willing to invest in Johnny Depp's films as well.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Well, President Volodymyr Zelensky is likely to sign some security agreements with Germany and France today, 2 years after Russia launched an invasion of his country. The president's meeting the German Chancellor in Berlin before heading off to Paris. Well, Corey Butler is from the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies and joins us now live. Corey Butler, thank you very much for being with us. Talk to us about this data that you have on Ukrainian refugees.
Good morning, Amali, and thank you for having me. It's hard to imagine that this has already been 2 years on since the escalation of the international armed conflict in Ukraine. And it has a devastating impact on people on every aspect of their lives. Many have lost their loved ones, their homes, their livelihoods, their savings. I'm sure many of you remember the horrific visuals of people. So, you know, carrying whatever they have with them, their pets and their luggage on trains, and many people that have now been divided and split. And many people have also lost their lives. So we have commissioned a study where we've seen there's some worrying trends that we're concerned about as we look forward into 2024. At the moment, we're seeing more than half of people across Ukraine and across the region have urgent unmet needs. With millions displaced globally now, people from Ukraine across Europe are now displaced, are forced to navigate a lot of uncertainty amid challenges of finding more permanent positions and jobs, to housing, to schools for their children. And many people are just starting over from scratch. And as the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, we've reached 18 million people with assistance. And across our network, we have national societies in 58 countries right now supporting people who have fled from Ukraine. And it's been everything from healthcare to the immediate assistance, cash assistance, mental health, and the rest. But we really know that the needs are great, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done. So in the study that we've commissioned, there's 3 major things that we're really concerned about now going forward. The first is that we're seeing that millions of Ukrainians are now struggling under increasing debt. In some neighboring countries, we're seeing up to 1 in 3 people are borrowing money just to survive and cover all of the basics. So rent, other types of services that they have, healthcare, the rest. They're also struggling financially as inflation, irregular income generation is really depleting a lot of their savings. It's forcing them to assume a lot of extra household debt. And we're seeing a lot of Ukrainians who are having to take on jobs that are underpaid, marginalized, or in dangerous situations. So it means that it's a very difficult space for them. And the second thing that we're really seeing as a concern now is the mental health. This is obviously often overlooked because it's not visible, but the majority of people we've heard from Ukraine have said that they have or their loved one have experienced stress or traumatic events. And that's pretty significant. Not only does that have an impact on themselves personally, but this we know also has huge...
We don't have loads of time, and I did want to get to ask you another quick question about it as well. Of course, you're working with Ukrainian refugees as well. Are you able to work in any way with some of the people that have been displaced from inside the battlefield, inside the fighting zone, on the other side of the line, the areas that Russia has invaded and taken?
So we have our Ukraine Red Cross teams on the ground, very close to the front line, who have been working literally around the clock since this started in very, very terrible conditions. We also work with our International Committee of the Red Cross, who work in these specific areas that are occupied. But we know that the needs are just massive there, a massive unmet need, and it's very difficult to access certain areas.
And in terms of the amount of funding, you mentioned that you're kind of funding some of those who've been displaced yourselves. That package of aid that was announced by the EU recently, and the package of aid that may well get through politicians in the United States soon, how much of that will go towards helping these kind of people, or is that all just sort of military spending and helping to refill some of the coffers of Ukraine?
Well, we're seeing now that the attention is also on other disasters and crises around the world. Ukraine is starting to fall off the map in terms of people wanting to invest and continue to support people. Where we are seeing is that a lot more aid is going into the front line and into the hardest hit areas for the urgent humanitarian need. But then what we're trying to really highlight is there's massive need now for the people who are displaced inside Ukraine and then across Europe as well.
Okay. Corey Butler from the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Appreciate the time. Thank you very much, and all the best in all of your work. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take a look at the weather forecast for the next few days. And I am told it's going to stay very, very mild for the time of year. It's about 15, 16 degrees on my way home yesterday afternoon. Let's take a look at the forecast for the weekend.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And that mild theme is going to continue, but it will be unsettled, and there'll be some wet and windy spells of weather across the country. Most places will be between weather systems today, which means a drier, brighter day with a few well-scattered showers. It will feel almost like spring in the sun, with temperatures mild again for the time of year. Showers will be focused across central and northern parts. Clouds going to build up over Ireland, bringing outbreaks of light rain or drizzle through the afternoon. After a largely dry evening, cloud will slowly thicken across west.
Hey, Charlie, you're on your way to Ghana. Boy, oh boy, you stressed out, tired. Go, you're going to be resting. Okay, then let me recommend to you JN Mobile Spa in Accra, Ghana. Oh boy, JN Mobile Spa will provide organic care in massage. Are you stressed? Do you need rejuvenated, etc.? For your facials, maybe exfoliating, firming, and lifting? Then contact JN Spa on 00233 244 941 002 or 00233 2006 06386, and they will be right there on time. JN Mobile Spa, your health and beauty needs at your doorstep.